Welcome to Mercy Hill podcast. We do these from time to time, and we do them when we have a subject that we're talking about on a Sunday morning that is too big to cover in a 35 minutes. So we love just gathering your questions, just kind of trying to get as many of them answered as possible. Some of them are very related, so you may not hear your question, but it'll probably be heard by another question that was asked that's very similar. If this is your first exposure and you missed Sunday mornings, we really encourage you to go hear Steve Jones's talk. He gave an amazing talk this morning about the Bible and trauma, which was really great. I was really excited about that. And now we get to answer those questions. So the order is listen to the sermon, then do this. But welcome, Steve Jones.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to hang out with you again, and even those of you that are watching this. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak at Mercy Hill this morning. Wasn't sure whether we were going to call it a sermon or a TED Talk, somewhere in between those two things, but really thankful for that opportunity to talk about something that I'm very passionate about.
Yeah, and I forgot to introduce myself. You know who I am, but to them, I'm Ernie Bonnoitt. I'm the pastor of Mercy Hill Church. Yeah. But Steve, tell us a little bit about you. What got you into counseling? Yeah. Give us a little bit of your background, your history.
Yeah, so I kind of grew up in a pastor's home. Didn't always think about being a pastor, but eventually became one. Sort of knew what I was getting into, but not really.
Man, isn't that the story?
Yeah. So I was on staff at a church for about 4 years, just associate worship and all that. It wasn't until I got into the lead role at a church in Des Moines, Iowa, in a part of the town that, everyone has problems, but it just felt like there was a lot of problems there. A lot of drug addiction, family dysfunction, and a lot of the way I'd been trained in counseling. I loved counseling, what I would describe more as pure biblical counseling, we just go to the Bible and there's something here, which I still think we should go to the Bible. There's a lot of great, that's where the ultimate hope and truth is. But what started to happen was people coming into our church with stuff that I didn't know what to do with. I had no idea. What I now would classify as pretty significant mental health issues, and it just seemed like my approach and my answers were just falling short. It wasn't what they needed in that moment. So I kind of grew up in a very conservative background, went to a very conservative Bible college, have a degree in theology, that just came at it with that, and thought that psychology, anything in that whole world was really not good. A guy that came to lead our psychology department at my Bible college started doing some things and they fired him. You're going too far with that. So I kind of had a negative feeling about that until I started encountering a lot of stuff. And it started to piqued my interest again, started reading a few things, and one thing led to another. And I just thought, I don't know what I'm doing. I want to help people. I know there's more to the brain. I know there's more to how things like trauma affect a person's body and brain, and just the complexities of that. So that led me quite a few years ago. I've been in a master's program for way too long. In 2014 is when I went to Drake University and began their mental health counseling program. And there was a lot of stops and starts in there.
Man.
Just because I was a lead pastor and just trying to run a church. But it just began to open my eyes to a world, that wasn't like pop psychology or just, it was, it was science. It was things that I just didn't really know were happening to people, and just neurologically, and that really affected my ability to introduce them to Christ and the gospel. And so that got me going down that path, and kind of put it on hold for several years until I got to Cornerstone, just because there was so much going on in our church in Des Moines. Then I resigned from there, moved up to Cornerstone Church, and somewhere along the line there, we decided to open a counseling center. And it made sense for me to start back in that program and finish it up, and it's been a grind.
When
But
you
it's done.
finish?
I'm
Oh,
done.
done.
Yeah.
Hey!
Yeah, so
Was I actually there like 2 weeks ago
Yes.
when you finished your last paper?
Yeah, you were. You got to be a
Man.
part of that
What
celebration.
a glorious moment.
Yeah.
To submit that last paper.
Right. But even if my program, it's been stretched way too long, I've just have lived in that world and been able to use things that I, continue to learn in my pastoral work. And so I think the way I see just those two worlds, it's not an either or. And even when I talk to pastors about, the Cornerstone Counseling Center, we have licensed professional counselors there, but they all are Christians, and they ultimately work from a Christian worldview, just what we would call an integrationist approach. And what I tell pastors, and what I came to, even when I studied in Des Moines, I just started finding professional Christian counselors where I could just send people, beyond things that were beyond my training and what felt like I was capable of doing. And the way I say it to pastors is it's a partnership. We're working together, and what we do is add another layer of pastoral care for the people that you love and care for. So we're partners. We're in this together, and that has, at least in the Ames community and some of the surrounding counties, pastors that are sending people to us, just become a blessing, and they're just mostly saying, "Thank you so much. We needed this for so long."
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I was working in Texas, just trying to create a roster of counselors.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, so many times I was finding myself just beyond my depth. Like,
Right.
I'm not trained for this. I'm trained
Yeah.
to, teach people to follow Jesus and make disciples and teach the Bible. But
Right.
there's so much of that aspect I didn't know. And is that one of the things that led you to creating the counseling center in Ames? Is that was there a deficiency of that, or was it our difficulty of finding it for people?
Yeah. So there were three. There's quite a few places in Des Moines, but there were three pretty large counseling centers that I would send people to.
Okay.
But I knew the directors of those counseling centers, and I heard a consistent thing. Up in Ames, up in Story County, there's nothing like like New Life Counseling or Family Legacy or Heart and Christian. There's nothing like that. There
Gotcha.
are some Christian therapists up there. One of my friends, who's the director of New Life Counseling, said if anyone ever went up there and did that, they would not be able to contain, because people come down to Des Moines for that. So even when I moved to Ames, that wasn't on the radar. It wasn't until Mark Vance and some of the staff went down to Austin Stone for some conferences, and they found out that it's a Christian counseling center. In fact, it had grown so much, there was 6 locations.
Oh, wow.
And it just had become a critical piece, and it was, counseling centers that were staffed by licensed professional counselors. So they came back and said, "Hey, do you think we could do something like this?" And I mean, the wheels just started turning immediately, and I'm like, I think we can. I think we can do this.
Wow.
And we opened 6 months later with 4 therapists, and by 3 months after that had 6 therapists, and a year later probably had 10. It just was blowing up. And all of them we would fill up immediately.
Yeah.
And it's just has continued. There's such a desire for professional counseling that is integrated with theology and Christian worldview.
Yeah. Yeah, and you had a hand in helping with the Cedar Falls one get off
Yes.
the ground. Yeah, you advised them.
Yeah, and Aaron Culley's the director there, and he and I were meeting and quite a bit, just almost like, here's how we did it, here's what we learned, and I said, you should get ready, because I think things could happen the exact same way there. And I think they started with him and maybe a couple other therapists, and just within a year and a half. I think the last time I counted, they might have 8 to 10 therapists already. And so they're just seeing Candeo Christian Counseling having the same impact in the Cedar Valley over there.
Yeah, and I think it's still such a great need, because, in Cincinnati, we've started to discover some people. If you're looking for something, by the way, we have some resources on our website, including some counselors. And some of you asked those questions, like who are some good ones? And that's just been some research that our staff's done. But even those are just full, like months out. Like it's just insane. Well, let's get into this topic of trauma, and we got a ton of great questions. So we're just gonna go through them as best we can. So here's one question. Is the first one actually is, how do you hold or acknowledge the trauma you've experienced with the hope we have in Christ?
Yeah. And that's a great question. And I think if you get a chance to listen to the sermon / TED Talk from this morning, I tried to weave some of that hope in there, just in kind of the end game of where we want to get. But within that, we do believe the gospel. We do believe that the healing we need is ultimately found in Christ and what He's able to do. He's a restorer. He's a healer, and the gospel does that. But it's just putting that out there, but being patient in how we bring that into the life of a person. So I would just say to that question, we want to give that hope, but we know that it might take time to get there, to walk patiently with that person.
Yeah, and even what came to mind as I was looking at was, the ultimate hope that we have is when we're in the presence of God and He's made all things new.
Right.
It's the return of Christ, and it's the redemption of all things that are broken. It's Revelation 21 that there'll be a day where this thing will be as far from you as eternity, and it is, and that day will be much longer than this life.
Right.
I don't know if that's very helpful though for people experiencing trauma at this moment, because it probably feels so oppressive to them.
Right.
It's like all I can feel is today.
Yeah.
I
think the thing about the hope we have in Christ is also where is the ultimate healing found. And I mentioned this in the talk this morning, work by Dr. Enright and many others, but he developed forgiveness therapy, and he was working with ladies who had been sexually abused, really complex trauma stuff. And just, he's a believer, but also a clinical psychologist, lots of research, and just, saying in maybe a therapeutic way what we know, that ultimately healing's found in forgiveness. We know that we can't hold on to anger and resentment and heal. And we don't want to say that too quickly because, it's okay to be angry. I mean, if an injustice happens to you, that's a hard thing. Even in, there's grief work even within trauma. The denial, the anger, the bargaining, just those steps that even when we help somebody work through grieving. And so a lot of times when I'm working with somebody has experienced trauma, I mean, there's loss involved. And so there's a lot of grief work inside that, and anger is one of them.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about that, because there's a question that came in, and it says, how do you walk alongside someone who has experienced deep trauma? And obviously, I think this is a friend talking about another friend, or someone that's close talking about them. Like, well, how do we be great friends to the people that we love in those moments?
Yeah. So we were even talking about that just a little bit, but I think it's in our attempt to help somebody, we want to move too quickly to fix them, to give them an answer, to coach, to teach, and all of that. And there may be a time and place for that at some point. But even in our trauma counseling training, even for a trained therapist who's working with people that have been traumatized, the first step is to create a place of safety, to make sure that person feels very safe with you, that you are their trusted one. You're the one that you may be the first person that they ever tell of what's really going on and what really happened, because maybe they've tried that before and it was minimized, or, we don't believe you, or in a lot of families, it's like, well, that could mess up our family, so we're just going to hide that. And so that person is suffering in silence. So we don't want to force people to go there. We want to be the friend that is just steady and consistent and safe, and that they feel that, and we let them be the one to, get to the point where they say, okay, I feel like I can entrust this to you.
So it's kind of like the practice of being present. Like
Yeah.
being present, empathy, like you're not a counselor.
Right.
Don't try to have the counseling session with them.
Yeah.
But just be a safe place for them to speak.
Right. And that's the other thing, to not carry that burden.
Yeah.
I've got, I've got to be a therapist. I got to have all these answers. If people just knew how much therapy there is just inside of a trusted friendship and relationship, where I feel like I can truly bare my soul and my deepest secrets, and you're not going to criticize me, you're not going to minimize it, you're not going to preach at me, correct me, all those things. That's where therapy begins. Even if you do the handoff to somebody else, there's incredible therapeutic work that happens inside of that.
Yeah, I've actually experienced that firsthand in going through difficult situations, and just the people that came alongside me, and they were just quiet, or they're just like created space and had patience, and they weren't like, dude, it's a week, like, why are you still on this? It's like, oh, dude, you don't understand.
Yeah, I had somebody one time, I was going through a fairly traumatic thing as a pastor, and was right in the middle of just saying, this is how it has affected me, these are the things I'm feeling, and I was starting to get really vulnerable.
Yeah.
And this person looked at me and said, do we need to keep talking about this? And we had only just started, in my mind, and I just closed off. And like right away, something in me said, you're not safe.
Yeah.
So but I needed that. I needed, after safety, there's processing.
Right.
And even at a certain level, friends and the trusted one, can even do some level of processing, which is like, it's okay to tell me your story.
Yeah, and you used that word earlier, the trusted one, as we were kind of looking through these questions before. Talk a little bit about that, because I think one of the questions that came out was like, what happens when I think somebody or one of my friends is going through trauma?
Yeah.
Like, what part does that trusted one play in? Like,
yeah, whether you would know if you're the trusted one.
Yeah.
Because some people are, like the self-appointed church fixer person, and they may have a good heart and they want to help people, so they might want to force issues and conversations with people that are not natural, and that person doesn't feel safe, even if they mean well. So, the person that is the trusted one is someone that there's been a lot of time in vulnerability at certain levels. Even in therapy, it might take 2 or 3 or 4 sessions before someone says, okay, I feel safe in this space.
yeah.
The therapist has been patient, has not been too quick to make judgments and, or give advice or whatever. And then that person sits back and says, I'm getting ready to tell you something that I've never told anybody.
Oh, wow.
And in that moment, you are a trusted one. They're going to entrust a really dark thing with you, because they know you're going to hold that with them and care for them inside of that.
Yeah. And when you're in those conversations with people, because somebody asked the question, like, are there certain phrases to avoid, or there's some things not to say? Like, you even mentioned one a minute ago, where, like, the guy just said, do we have to keep talking about this?
Yeah.
There's some that come to mind. They're just like, hey, they seem helpful, but they're not helpful.
Yeah, I think some of the quick cliches, I mentioned a couple of them, in the talk this morning, and I do want to read Diane Lambert's quote just one more time.
Do it.
But, we want to avoid things like, the Bible says don't be anxious about anything. I can sense you have a lot of anxiety right now, so you need to repent of that and just trust God more, or whatever. Not realizing that so much of that anxiety is just, they're not choosing to be anxious. There's just so much impact that complex trauma or just any kind of traumatic experience has on a person.
Right.
If they're still in that fight or flight mode. So just, things that would make them at fault, that would point the blame at them. A Christian doesn't think that way, feel that way. You should never be angry. You should never worry. And So just being careful with some of those quick Christian phrases. But Diane Langford says, clinical psychologist, incredible Christian woman. She was one of the people that helped develop the Caring Well curriculum and things, and just a wonderful person. She said, keep in mind that when someone comes to see you to talk about abuse, they are attempting to tell you something they most want to forget. They are afraid of what happened, of the person who did it, of you and your reactions, as well as of remembering and speaking out loud. So I've had people that have come out of very, very abusive situations, and they were told by a church leader or even a pastor, you need to go back and reconcile with them. And it wasn't even safe. So just things like that, safety first, whatever that situation is. They are afraid of what you will think of them. So we don't want to say things that offer any kind of judgment things that they're thinking and feeling. They feel overwhelmed. Your main task is to listen well. They want to tell you an ordered story. Most abuse and rape stories come out fragmented and disordered. And so saying things like, well, that doesn't make sense. You said this over here, and now you're saying this. Is this true? Is this real? Are you making this up? And so understanding how the trauma brain works, and it's fragmented, and that it's not going to come out in a clean, linear story.
Wow.
So those kind of responses. And when you think about it and you hear that, you're like, well, wow, I would never want to do that, but we often do that.
But I've done it.
I caught you in a lie. You said this here, and now you're saying this. And so we just, if it's a person that has experienced real trauma, we want to be so careful with that. They may say things to you that you want to correct. And so any kind of things in this initial disclosure that we don't want to correct, we just want to listen and validate. This is not the time for that. You're giving them a safe space to tell a frightening and often shame-ridden story at their pace. Let them know that what they're doing is courageous and is the right thing to do. They're speaking a truth and dragging darkness into light. So, things like that I think often happen when we are in fix mode. I think if we just move out of fix mode and into empathetic listening mode, and my main thing right now is to make you feel very safe with me, and then that helps keep us from making those kind of statements that could actually cause more harm.
It's the idea of being a smoker instead of a microwave.
Yes.
So often we want to just microwave it right away, but it probably needs to sit there for much longer, do you think?
Yeah.
And for a person like me who's very type A,
right,
I'm like whack-a-mole. Like, there it is. Let's check this list off, and it's just not helpful. And one of the things I've found as I've gotten older in pastoring, it's just like the more I shut my mouth and just listen, the better it is for that person. Sometimes it will actually almost every time.
Yeah, they're going to go to the person that they already feel like they have a relationship with. I mean, they're usually somebody, people do, not always, but people do have somebody that they generally feel like, I think I can go to, this person. I can go to Ernie and just tell him just about anything because I know him, he knows me, he loves and cares for me. So if you're the one that they come to, they're not just coming to anyone. There's something that they feel good about, safe about. So that's a stewardship. They're entrusting something to us, and so we want to manage that really well. Yeah.
And it's such a vulnerable spot to be in, for them to be in, and it really matters how you respond. And so we have a question here. It's kind of along the lines of like, hey, so I have a friend, and when they talk about trauma and mental health issues, they think it's a result that a person sinned and that they're to blame for it. The people who experience trauma is for blame for it. So how would you respond to someone like that? It's going like, well, it's all a root from your sin.
Yeah. So I think it's distinguishing between trauma and other things. Like I have anxiety.
Yeah.
Well, what happened? Why do you have it? Well, I cheated on a test.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid the professor's going to find out about it and flunk me. I have anxiety. Okay, so there are some things like that where we could say, that we can point to a sin that was committed that's causing that. But when you look at the whole gamut of anxiety, when somebody comes to me and says, I was raped, and you think of how violating that is, and
Right.
it was someone that forced themselves on them.
Right.
And, as I said this morning, you're not to blame, and you're not at fault, you're not to blame. Yeah, but there's all kinds of emotions that they're feeling shame, they're feeling guilt, they're feeling anxiety. They're just, and then you find out that it has happened multiple times, and then you find out it's happened by someone that should have been a protector and wasn't. So there's no secure base, there's no safe haven there. So that person is also experiencing high levels of anxiety and stress and hypervigilance, and they're afraid.
Yeah.
So you can take those same words and say some fear is rooted in
Right.
some kind of sin or anxiety. Some fear is you are in a situation. If any of us were abducted, like I said this morning,
Right.
and we're going to have fear, and it's not because we're in sin. It's because someone is doing something to us that's outside of our control. It's a power and control thing.
Yeah.
So I would just say that that's not right to think. That just always points the finger at the victim, and that's. I don't think that's the gospel. I think God is a defender of the weak, is a defender of the oppressed, and I think there's plenty of information in Scripture where God steps in, not pointing the finger of sin, but you are being oppressed, and I am a defender of the weak. Things that happen to orphans and widows, and all the fear associated with that in ancient Near East culture, it was terrible, and God stepping in, not blaming but defending.
Yeah, like I think about how Paul, I think it's in Philemon or whatever, he says, I loved you like a father, I loved you like a mother. And it's like, I feel like those people, I watch my wife love our kids, and when they're scared, like, she just runs and hugs them. I'm like, what are you doing? But the love of, like, those what people need in those moments, of someone to come wrap their arms around them and be like, and create a sense of safety so that, like, normal dialogue could happen. Like, because is that correct? Like, am I going out the right way? Yeah.
I mean, I just think we had a tornado coming towards Stillwater, Oklahoma. I mean, there was actually about 7 or 8 coming toward the town. And my boys were terrified because we could see one of them. It was like a half-mile wide, and it was still 5 miles out, coming straight for the church.
Oh, wow.
Everybody was in a state of panic and fear, and some in terror. There was no basement. There was nowhere to go.
Yeah.
And some of us felt like, this could be it. We could die. Do we get in our car and drive somewhere? Do we stay? So it would have been wrong for me as a dad to do anything but gather my boys around and just hold them and acknowledge we're all afraid right now. But it had nothing to do with a sinful response.
Right.
It's like there's a tornado.
Right. There's something that's devastating coming there. Yeah. And I see people too in these moments, like, I don't know if I have the right words for it, but there's people that, like, they want to be helpful and they give really bad advice.
Right.
Or they give it at the wrong time. Like, they want to talk about, someone has been hurt, they went out and someone took advantage of them, and then what they want to address is, what were you doing out?
Right.
And it's like, and I think there's a moment about being wise and being safe, but I don't think it's like in the first 20 conversations, with that person, about, like, because there's a reality of, hey, it's a dangerous world, but I just think they get to that conversation way too soon. Is that Is that where you see a lot of that?
Yeah, it's just the quick
fix,
analyzing, jumping to conclusions, making assumptions. And you just don't know what happened. And even then, if a 28-year-old is doing something to a 14-year-old, it doesn't matter.
Right.
It's statutory rape, and you could point the finger at the 14-year-old girl and say, well, you should have never been there, and why did you sneak out of the house?
Right.
And what she needs, she's been violated, and even if she made some bad decisions, she's been violated.
Right.
And what she needs
She's
is
14.
empathy and safety, and she got taken advantage of
Right.
by an adult.
Yeah, she's a
So
victim.
there's just ways that we move in, and we don't make a quick rush to judgment, and we don't see these mental health crisis, the effects of trauma, as always pointed to some kind of sin decision that somebody made.
Yeah.
I think that's a mistake that is often made inside of the church.
So here's a question that was asked too. It's kind of a change of pace, a little bit more direct. It says, how do you lead your family through a sexual abuse of a child?
Yeah.
You know, and I hear the stats you were saying, like, what was it, 1 in 5?
Yeah.
You know?
So my response to that is usually to introduce, if people aren't aware of it, the whole idea of attachment theory, and that's in which happens inside the home. You know, kids either grow up with a secure base or an insecure base,
Okay.
or secure attachment or insecure attachment. Those secure attachments provide the best possible way for kids to develop relationally and emotionally, because they are just interacting not with perfect parents, but with parents that are doing the best job to create a place that feels safe, you know, proper amounts of exploration, but we're here, we're safe. So when that's not there, when it's an insecure attachment, and that can manifest in so many different ways, those kids are in a much more vulnerable place as far as when things happen. They're not developing the same way relationally, emotionally. So when I hear a question like that, you know, family does need to, you know, evaluate what do our kids experience in this place. Are they experiencing a secure space? Is it a secure, or is it insecure? And that's when you just bring in all kinds of things that we would teach even in parenting classes. You know, just what's the difference between authoritative parenting and passive parenting? And we want to be in that middle lane of authoritative, which is the Ephesians 6:4 idea. We're not exasperating them, we're not stirring them up to anger out of just injustice and just treating them however we want.
Right.
And then that bringing them up is that trefo. It's the idea of nurture and tenderness. So the environment we're creating, where we want to get to the boundaries and, you know, teaching, is an environment that's filled with nurture and safety. So I think parents need to think about that when something comes up. What does it feel like inside of here? Maybe make some correctives there. But some of the correctives can be made in that moment. And like this family I just work with, you know, right away, and it was one of those things where the parents could have said, it's inside of the extended family. We don't want to blow this thing up. It's implicating this family member. They could have made their teenage daughter feel even more traumatized and hurt if they had not, you know, as a dad, he's a big dude, just, you come behind me. I am your protector right now. I believe you, and I'm going to protect you from any further harm.
Right.
What happens is we don't want to mess up the family system, and so we're not going to protect you. We sort of believe what you're saying, but we want to keep everything happening normal here. So we're still going to get together for all the family stuff and still putting that. And what that communicates to that teenage daughter is you don't really care. You don't really believe how deeply this has hurt me. And so what that family did was they addressed it. They said, we believe you, and we're gonna confront it, even if the outcome is our family system will never be the same. The message they sent to her was, we believe you and we're going to protect you, and we want to help you get the help that you need, even if it means that things are going to be different. It sent an incredible message to her. You know, we're walking with you. We want to do everything we have to do, even if it's painful. So it meant some painful confrontations. It was terrible. It was gut-wrenching. We cried and prayed together. But I know that teenage girl feels loved and safe and cared for because mom and dad stepped in and said, we really are a safe haven. And now it's being tested. And we're gonna keep living that way with you.
Yeah. If there's steps for like a parent to have, you know, like if they experience that their child's been abused, like, what are those steps? Is it like believe them? Is it call the police? Is it, find a counselor? Like, what are some of those steps that would be like?
I mean, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, the first thing is to believe, and I think that's what we're hearing from Diane Langbird and so many others. Kids are generally not going to make that stuff up.
Yeah.
So we just want them to feel like we believe you. It took them a lot of courage to get to that point. We believe you, and we want to protect you. People often debate on why do we call the police? Why do we get civil authorities? And Romans 13 is very clear that the civil authorities aren't like those people on the outside. They are God's servants,
Right.
to protect and guide and correct. And so, when something, the kind of the litmus test on, and this is what a lot of churches, the whole Southern Baptist thing. Well, this is something that happened inside the church, and we just handle it inside the church, and we don't need to get people outside the church involved. And the problem with that is when something is a criminal act, it's like, okay, that's not something for Pastor Ernie.
Right.
This a criminal action happened, and so it's incumbent upon families and churches to get the civil authorities involved. And I think a reason for that, it doesn't mean that they're going to arrest or do anything, but I think it gives the appropriate authority. Because you can go, there's a difference between you going and saying, hey, we heard this, and we're here to confront you. And I'm like, well, God love you, you're Pastor Ernie, you're a great guy, but there's a difference between that and something criminal happened here, and it's a guy wearing a uniform that's with you and saying, we love you, but this is very serious, and we want to move into this in a way that protects the victim and hopefully leads you to repentance and restoration. So I think making that call is appropriate, even if it feels very painful. Like, wow, I can't believe I'm calling the police, especially if it's inside the family. The reason why it's so important to say inside the family is because that's where most sexual abuse happens.
Right.
So you're calling the police on
A cousin, a brother,
an
aunt,
uncle, a grandpa.
Yeah.
But it needs to happen. And it doesn't mean I don't love you. It means I love you so much that you need a God-appointed authoritative voice in your life. And whatever consequences come out, you can't engage in criminal activity and think we're going to hide it and cover it up.
Right. Yeah. And so, along with that, you mentioned the Southern Baptist stuff.
Yeah.
We had a question that came in about this. Says, can y'all address church hurt/trauma? I think it's a real issue these days, especially in light of the Southern Baptist denomination and other denominations and what they've gone through.
Yeah.
So
something that I always thought that was well known, but not as well known as I had hoped, is the Caring Well initiative. And so you can go to caringwell.com and see, after the 2019 Houston Chronicle expose about 600 plus pastors, church leaders that had allegations and even, verified, that were just, where the churches weren't doing much about it. It was just blown out into this article. And the Southern Baptist, at least an element of it, responded. J.D. Greer was the president at that time, and he put a commission together, and an amazing and super helpful resource came out where churches there's training videos, there's books, there's all kinds of things in response to that. The sad fact is that whole thing was rejected by a lot of Southern Baptist pastors and churches and leaders for all kinds of reasons. They didn't want to have to deal with all the litigation. They just didn't want to deal with Pastor so-and-so because we were in seminary together, and just all these weird things that overlooked the deep pain and hurt in the lives of many women that had experienced that in a place with a pastor, worship leader again, in kind of the idea of complex trauma with somebody that should be a safe place,
Right.
and where they use their position as for power and control over that. So, I and some of our staff from Cornerstone, when they put on a Caring Well conference, I think it was the summer of 2019. I mean, they rolled it out fast, and we flew down and went to a conference. And I mean, I wept through most of it, honestly. I mean, mainly because I weep easy. But it was like these 30-minute TED Talks from pastors, therapists, clinical psychologists, law enforcement, attorneys that were in litigation and in sexual abuse situations. We were just getting barraged with that, but they were mixed with stories by 40-year-old women, 50-year-old women, 70-year-old women who for the first time were saying, here's my story. And,
Wow.
I feel like finally I can tell my story. I feel like finally I'm going to be believed. And it was, I left there angry, hopefully in a good way. An anger, a passion that just pushed me even further. And I had already worked with a lot of abused women in my church in Des Moines, but just even a greater fire to stand in the gap and advocate for those who've been abused. And we came back and launched that initiative at Cornerstone, and I mean, that's just part of the language in our church. We put in policies and things, and most of our leaders have gone through it. We take our staff through it every year, and we just want people to know Cornerstone is a safe place. And, anytime I have the opportunity, for that kind of question, which is a great question, and it's a legitimate one, because honestly, a lot of churches are not safe. And I hate to say that, but that's just the reality. I, want to advocate for that and encourage churches to take bold and courageous steps. It is. It requires. They tell you, it's the sexual abuse inside the church is not happening, from the people coming from the outside. 80% is already in-house.
Yeah.
And because, they're already in a position where they are trusted.
Trust.
And so they're able to, really take advantage of that, to take advantage of people.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a question that gets me pretty fired up, honestly.
Cool. Yeah, I'm excited about that material, and our staff gets to meet with you for a couple hours tomorrow.
I'm just going to give you a taste,
Yeah.
just show you a couple of those training videos, and hopefully that'll suck you guys into going through the whole thing. And I'm going to give you the books and all that stuff. So anyway, even what we're going to do in the morning, and just this whole weekend is so fantastic. A lot of churches wouldn't even do this. And so, I mean, I feel like Mercy Hill is truly a safe haven, honestly.
Well, we want to be.
Yeah.
That's kind of our name, Mercy
Yes,
Hill.
right.
we live in a world where there's
Right.
no mercy. We want to be a place that extends as much of it as possible, And so, yeah. Here's another question too. It's another one of these hey, Christians have said medication is never the answer. How do you bring up that conversation to help people understand its need?
Yeah, I think there's just a lot of misconceptions about medication, and I certainly had them, and not even understanding why it's needed and how it can be helpful. So even, like I mentioned, continued elevated levels of adrenaline and cortisol, which should come back out when your body starts to relax and the parasympathetic kicks in. So, but what happens is some of those stress hormones, and I don't want to get too detailed into all of this complicated language, but it does impact the neurobiology of the brain. Just, neurotransmitters, just the chemicals that are needed for your brain to work right. And so things like continued elevated stress impacts the way that's working. You have, serotonin is one of the necessary ones, and so the medications like an SSRI, Prozac, Zoloft, those kinds of things, what they're doing is, there's, in your neurons, pumps that pump these neurotransmitters in and out at normal levels, and so those are affected and they're not working as well. So something like a Zoloft or a Prozac, SSRIs and other medications like that, there's so many, they help to make the brain work and manage those levels of. Is this more than you even want to know?
No, this is great right here, and I think too is like, I think a person that's asking this question is denying the reality that like trauma has a physical like effect on your life, like that which is a weird thing, because mostly as Christians, like we'll tell people, hey, you want to get a counselor that is like, I've said this, and I was like, you want to have a counselor as a Christian because you want them to treat you mind, body, and soul,
Right.
And so like a secular view of it can deny the soul,
Right.
Whereas like I think sometimes Christians deny the physical aspect of like, no, these things have effects on you. Like you have muscles in your body that go like tense up from stress and can cause like, I mean, I had to go to a PT a couple of days ago because I was having stress and ran all the way down my back and all the way down my leg.
Yes.
And I was like, and they're like, hey man, take a day off. And I was like, yeah, I probably do.
So that's a good point, because I think we can identify when mind and emotion is affecting us viscerally.
Yes.
Like I'm getting ready to get up and give my first speech, and I have diarrhea.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, is something wrong with you?
Yeah.
No, it's just my body's reaction to stress.
Right.
So that's a funny example, but we get gut aches, we do get pain. There's ways that, Besser Van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, talks about how all of this is stored in our body, how we experience it. So I think if we're rational about this, we all could say, okay, I can see how mind and emotion is impacting me physically.
Right.
I feel it in my heart's pounding. Is there something sinful about my heart? Beating 120 beats a minute because I'm nervous about something. No, I'm not going to tell you to repent. I'm going to tell you just start breathing and get your heart rate back down and all of that stuff. So the brain is the same way. The brain is an organ. It's the way God created it. It's there's neurological pathways that are laid, and even in those early years, birth to 5 years old, so much of your brain is being shaped. And another book I recommend people to read, it's an extreme book, but it's called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, and it's just an extreme case of a kid that was raised in dog kennels.
Yeah, and
until about 5. And when they pulled him out, you could almost say he had brain damage, but it was because he didn't have any kind of relational, emotional, nurturing connection with any adult. Yeah. And so he basically had a brain that couldn't communicate and function properly simply because of lack of nurture and neglect.
Yeah.
So when you get back to, that's one end of the continuum, and you have down here. But when you think of medication, something has happened. Zoloft, Prozac, those kind of things are called SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors.
Okay.
And what it's saying is too much of it's being pulled out. Okay. We want to leave some of it in.
Okay.
So the SSRIs are actually impacting the way the pumps are working. So just think of it as it's making the pumps work properly.
Gotcha.
And it's keeping the right amount of serotonin in there so that your brain can work. So we never say, I never tell anybody, and a good psychiatrist who's prescribing medications is never saying, this is the end all, this is a cure.
Right.
It's a mood stabilizer. It helps stabilize you so that some of these other things, therapy, even for believers. I've had people come to me and say, I've never thought about taking medication. I've always been told it's wrong to take it. And these are staff. Mm-hmm. What do you think? I'm like, go right now.
And get the medicine.
Get it. And it's not to negate their faith in Christ, their walk with Christ, their belief in the gospel, and all those things, or even therapy they're getting, but it's a stabilizer to get the pumps working right, which are being impacted by stress levels. And so it's mood stabilizer, and then I'm able to really begin to process
Yes.
what's happening to me, what's at the root of stress levels. And so one staff member came back and said, please tell the world. Because and they were having panic attacks, and they had been doing everything, praying, and just all kinds of stuff. And again, prayer's not bad, but they just kept having, for a good chunk of their adult life, panic attacks, and they just went away.
I think a piece of it too is like people are like, well, if God wants to heal you, He's going to heal you.
Right.
And it's like, and I always look at it like this, like, look, like, God uses a lot of miracles in people's life.
Right.
Like, for instance, some of the miracles that you've heard from the Lord has been through the community.
Right.
Like through friends speak. It wasn't a cloud from the,
Okay,
it wasn't a
so
cloud.
if your heart is doing some kind of weird pitter patter,
Yeah.
and your doctor says, "Hey, take this medication,
Right.
and it'll help make your heart get back in a normal rhythm," I'm not going to tell you, Ernie. Just trust God, and
He'll heal your heart.
He'll heal your heart.
Yeah.
So the thing about medication is, and just remember, a lot of people don't know what a psychiatrist is. A psychiatrist is a guy that's been all the way through med school.
Mm-hmm.
Some people focus on feet, some people focus on brain,
Okay.
They have focused, their specialization is psychiatric medication.
Okay.
That's just where they specify. So they're an MD. So they're not, the wacky quacky whatever people tend to think. I mean, there's a reason they can prescribe medications. They take you, if you went to see a psychiatrist, it'd be like going to see your doctor, because they are a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't even know where I was going with that.
Well, you're just saying like medicine is a tool.
Okay, you have to think about the brain as an organ.
Right.
It's part of your body.
Right.
No different than your heart, or no different than your stomach. If you have something going on in your stomach, you're like, please give me some medicine.
Yeah.
My stomach won't
I
stop
mean, is that the
killing me.
blessing of God that He's like, hey, now He's brought these,
Right.
like He's given people the ability to create these
Right.
medicines and be used.
So
So you don't die of like you used to have gut rot all the time. We don't have
Yes.
to worry about that. We don't have to worry about some of these things anymore.
Right. I mean, Besser Van der Kolk, he talks about this in his book, and a lot of others, they just kind of stumbled way back in the day on some of these SSRIs and started putting some of these trauma victims, these guys coming back from war and with PTSD. And again, it wasn't a cure, but it helped stabilize them where they could actually function and start, moving further toward, healing and hope.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Okay, so I'm going to finish with one more question, and we may have a second one depending on how quickly, because this kind of dovetails into something we've already answered, but it's a little bit more particular. Guys, you mentioned the church as a safe haven several times in dealing with someone whose trauma is caused by the church itself. How does that change your approach in dealing with or talking with them? And not as a counselor, I'm assuming, but as a friend, engaging with them where they have, significant church hurt, where they were, I guess the question is, like, how do you get them not to throw the church out? With what?
yeah, I think the first thing they need to hear is, you're right.
Yeah.
And I said that to somebody one time, and they just looked at me like, are you throwing churches under the bus? I'm saying, well, a lot of them.
Yeah.
Guilty as charged.
Mm-hmm.
The church has done a horrible job of covering up and not helping people. And I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Will you forgive me? I'm speaking on behalf of Big C.
Yeah.
I'm trying to, myself as a pastor, move in a different direction and help other pastors move in a different direction. So I think that's what Caring Well was about. No more denial, no more cover up. We envision a church that's different. We envision that there are churches like in Mercy Hill or Cornerstone where a person truly can feel safe, where we're not going to sweep things under the rug. We're not going to cover up just to protect somebody's title or position. We're going to deal with it. And I even tell stories. Here's what happened here. Here's where someone was confronted here. We're not afraid of that anymore. It's safety for the abused victim first, even inside of marriages where there's domestic violence. It used to be save the marriage first. Now it's save the wife first. We want to make sure you're safe and protected. And that message is something a lot of people have never heard because that's just not been their experience. So the best we can do is acknowledge it, not deny it. Say you're right. and that's sad. And church history is filled with really terrible stories, but we envision a church that's different.
Right.
And that's our message, and that's what we hope to accomplish.
Yeah, and all we could be is humble and own our stuff.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. That's right.
Well, Steve, thanks for talking with us today.
Yeah.
It was truly a gift to hear you teach.
Yeah.
You know, look forward to you doing it again at some point at Mercy Hill Church. You know,
I would love that.
You know, and then having to have this conversation with you, I feel so like, I'm like, oh, this is such above my head. I'm like just learning as much as I can about this stuff. You know, so I appreciate you.
Yeah, hopefully we all, I love my clinical supervisor. I call him the mental health Yoda of Ames, Iowa. And he's so humble and is just, he'll say to me, I'm learning so much from you. And I don't think he is, but maybe he is. But I think it's just, you know, even my posture coming in is we're all continuing to move in a direction and learn together. And if anything I've said, you know, in here or in the message this morning helped anybody, I would feel great about that. But I'm excited even the way I'm continuing to grow and learn and my ability to help people and help churches. So grateful for the opportunity to come in.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you guys for your questions. If we didn't hit your question, man, we'd love to figure out how to do that. But we just answered as many as we could and tried to keep that within
And the time flew by. Wow.
I know, didn't it? All right, until next time. See you later.
Thanks.